The morning mist clung to Ravens Hollow like a burial shroud, and by 10:37 a.m. on October 15, 1923, 3 more bodies would join the 26 already buried in unmarked graves behind the Grimsby homestead. This wasn't just another family tragedy in the remote Appalachian Mountains. This was systematic elimination, disguised as hospitality, and it had been happening for over 4 decades. Before we descend deeper into this forgotten corner of American darkness, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. If this story grips you the way it should, hit that like button and subscribe, because some family secrets were buried for a reason. The scent of wood smoke and wild honeysuckle had always masked something fouler in Ravens Hollow, a narrow valley carved between 2 ridges in what would become West Virginia. The texture of the mountain air itself seemed different here, thicker, more oppressive, as if the very atmosphere held its breath. And threading through it all was the constant whisper of Bitter Creek, whose waters ran darker than they should, even after the heaviest rains. Local Cherokee had avoided this particular hollow for generations, calling it the place where spirits grow hungry, but white settlers dismissed such warnings as primitive superstition. Erasmus Grimsby had claimed this isolated patch of wilderness in 1879, arriving with his pregnant wife Sophronia Fenley and a wagon full of tools that seemed better suited for surgery than farming. The couple's background remained deliberately vague. Erasmus claimed to be from Pennsylvania, while Sophronia spoke with an accent that suggested deeper southern roots. What mattered wasn't where they came from, but what they built in that remote valley, a homestead that would become both sanctuary and slaughterhouse. The Grimsby compound sprawled across 43 acres of timber and rocky soil. Seemingly unremarkable, except for one crucial feature, it sat at the intersection of 3 different mountain passes, making it a natural stopping point for travelers, traders, and anyone foolish enough to journey alone through the wilderness. Erasmus had chosen his location with the precision of a spider selecting the perfect spot for its web. The main house, constructed from local chestnut logs, featured uncommonly thick walls and basement rooms that served purposes far beyond simple storage. From a September 1881 entry in the Morgantown Herald, travelers report excellent hospitality at Grimsby Station. Clean beds, hearty meals, reasonable rates. A welcome respite for those traversing the treacherous mountain roads. The family grew over the years, but not through natural increase alone. Felicity Westbrook arrived as Erasmus's supposed sister-in-law in 1882, her husband having died under mysterious circumstances during their journey from Virginia. Lucius Harbottle appeared the following spring with Adelaide Wycliffe, who claimed to be his wife, though no marriage certificate was ever filed with the county clerk. Absalom Brackett drifted in during the harsh winter of 1885, ostensibly Sophronia's cousin, bringing skills in metalwork that proved invaluable for crafting specialized implements. Death feeds on kindness. By 1890, the compound housed 11 adults and 6 children, an unusually large family, even by mountain standards. Elias Carawell managed the livestock that somehow multiplied despite no visible breeding program. Magnolia Dunsworth tended the extensive gardens that yielded crops far beyond what the poor soil should have supported. Eugenia Blackford oversaw the kitchen operations with an efficiency that bordered on industrial. Each family member had their role, and each role served the larger enterprise of transforming travelers into sustenance. What made the Grimsbys truly remarkable was their uncanny ability to feed so many mouths in a region where most families struggled to survive winter. Their larder never seemed to empty. Their smokehouse always billowed with the rich scent of cured meat. Their hospitality toward strangers became legendary throughout the mountain communities, with tales of Sophronia's exceptional cooking traveling from settlement to settlement, along with recommendations to seek shelter at the Grimsby homestead. Cyrus Gainsborough, the circuit preacher who serviced the scattered mountain settlements, began documenting what would later be recognized as a pattern of systematic disappearance. His handwritten records, discovered decades later in the basement of a demolished church in Beckley, revealed something that should have raised immediate alarm. The Grimsby homestead hosted an unusually high number of lone travelers, yet Gainsborough never encountered the same guest twice during his monthly visits. When the preacher questioned Erasmus about this constant turnover, the patriarch's explanations were always reasonable. People moved on quickly in these mountains, always chasing rumors of work opportunities, available land, or distant family. The region's isolation made communication difficult. Letters went astray, messages never arrived, and the harsh terrain claimed its share of travelers who simply couldn't handle the journey to their next destination. But Gainsborough's ministerial duties required him to maintain detailed records of his flock, and his growing unease led him to document every interaction at the Grimsby table. His ledger from 1894 shows 47 different individuals who shared meals at their homestead. By the following year, he could account for the actual whereabouts of only 12. The other 35 had vanished completely from the mountain region, leaving behind no forwarding addresses, no messages to family, no trace of their continued existence anywhere in the surrounding counties. The preacher's suspicions deepened when he realized that several travelers he'd personally blessed and counseled at the Grimsby dinner table had failed to appear at their intended destinations. Letters sent to their supposed relatives went unanswered. Inquiries to town officials in distant communities yielded no records of arrival. It was as if the mountain passes themselves had swallowed these people, leaving behind nothing but fading memories and the lingering taste of Sophronia's exceptional cooking. What Gainsborough didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that those 35 people hadn't simply disappeared into the wilderness or fallen victim to the mountain's natural dangers. They had been systematically murdered and transformed into the very hospitality that made the Grimsby family so beloved throughout the region, their flesh becoming the tender roasts and savory stews that sustain the compound through harsh winters and earn praise from every surviving guest. How does an entire family commit murder for decades without discovery, and what finally brought their carefully orchestrated reign of terror to its inevitable bloody conclusion? Nathaniel Ashbourne's boots never left the threshold of the Grimsby homestead, though his screams echoed through the basement until well past midnight on November 3rd, 1896. Understanding how the Grimsbys perfected their deadly hospitality reveals a family operation so methodical it would make modern serial killers seem impulsive by comparison. The sound of hammer strikes rang across Raven's Hollow each morning, sharp metallic percussion that neighbors assumed came from routine maintenance. The smell of lye soap hung heavy around the compound's washing areas, acrid and medicinal in its intensity. Beneath visitors' feet, the floorboards felt unnaturally thick and solid, reinforced with iron brackets that seemed excessive for a simple mountain home. These weren't the sensory markers of ordinary frontier life. They were the industrial signatures of systematic murder. Erasmus had spent 2 years in a Cincinnati medical school before mysterious circumstances forced his departure in 1877. His partial training proved invaluable in designing what he called the process, a method of subduing guests that left no obvious signs of struggle and preserved the quality of meat for later consumption. The basement laboratory he constructed beneath the main house contained anatomical charts, surgical instruments, and detailed notes on human physiology that would have impressed university professors. The selection process began the moment travelers appeared on the mountain paths leading to Raven's Hollow. Absalom Brackett, positioned as the compound's unofficial scout, would observe approaching visitors from strategic vantage points, assessing their potential value. Lone travelers with quality possessions received the warmest welcome. Groups of 2 or 3 faced polite redirection to other settlements. Large parties, or those with scheduled arrivals elsewhere, were offered only basic supplies and sent on their way quickly. From Erasmus Grimsby's personal journal, dated March 1892. Subject: exhibited excellent muscular development. Approximate weight, 160 pounds. Clean living habits evident. Estimated yield, 43 pounds usable meat, plus organs and rendered fat. Sophronia Fenley orchestrated the actual elimination with theatrical precision. Her famous welcome dinner featured a special herbal tea blend that contained precisely measured amounts of Jimson weed and wild mushroom extracts. The mixture induced gradual disorientation without immediate alarm. Guests would report feeling pleasantly drowsy, attributing their condition to mountain air and hearty food. Within 30 minutes, victims experienced complete muscle paralysis while retaining full consciousness. Cordelia Trenholm, who joined the family in 1893 after her husband's convenient death from food poisoning, managed the disposal operations. Her background in textile work proved surprisingly applicable to butchering human bodies with minimal waste. She developed techniques for processing remains that yielded maximum meat while reducing bones to powder using a combination of lime and mechanical grinding. The family's unusually productive vegetable garden benefited from this calcium-rich fertilizer. The hunger never sleeps. The compound's daily routine revolved around accommodating their dual existence as mountain hosts and cannibalistic predators. Magnolia Dunsworth supervised the kitchen operations that transformed human flesh into palatable meals, using spice combinations and cooking methods that mask the distinctive taste and texture of their primary protein source. Her recipe collection, discovered years later, contained detailed instructions for preparing what she euphemistically called special game in dozens of different preparations. Eugenia Blackford maintained the family's correspondence network, crafting letters from murdered guests to their distant relatives. Her elegant handwriting and talent for mimicking different regional dialects allowed the Grimsbys to maintain the illusion that their victims had successfully completed their journeys and settled in new locations. These deceptive communications often included requests for money or personal effects to be forwarded to specific addresses, all of which led back to the Grimsby compound through a network of intermediaries. The family's children received education in the family business from an early age, beginning with simple tasks like grinding bones and tending the lime pits. By adolescence, they participated in victim selection and demonstrated proficiency with various tools of the trade. This generational training ensured operational continuity and maintained the psychological conditioning necessary for systematic murder to feel routine rather than aberrant. Lucius Harbottle managed external relationships with neighboring settlements, carefully cultivating the Grimsby reputation for hospitality while gathering intelligence about potential victims. His regular trips to trading posts and market towns allowed him to identify lonely travelers, recently widowed individuals, and others whose disappearance would attract minimal investigation. He maintained detailed files on hundreds of potential targets throughout the region. The family's success depended on precise timing and coordination. Adelaide Wycliffe tracked the seasonal patterns of mountain travel, identifying periods when lone travelers were most common and when their absence would be least noticeable. The spring and fall hunting seasons provided perfect cover for increased meat processing activities, as the sounds and smells associated with butchering could be attributed to legitimate game preparation. Financial records discovered decades later revealed the operation's impressive profitability. Beyond the obvious savings on food costs, the Grimsbys systematically looted their victims' possessions, selling valuable items through established networks of mountain traders who asked few questions about provenance. Cash found on bodies funded compound improvements and equipment purchases. Personal effects were either destroyed or incorporated into the family's daily life with disturbing casualness. Elias Carrowell developed the security protocols that kept the operation hidden from outside scrutiny. His network of early warning systems used reflecting mirrors and arranged stone markers to signal approaching visitors from miles away. This advance notice allowed the family to stage appropriate scenes of normal domestic life while concealing evidence of their primary activities. But maintaining such an elaborate deception required constant vigilance, and by 1897, cracks were beginning to appear in their carefully constructed facade. What happens when a cannibalistic family operation becomes too successful for its own good? And how did their methodical approach to murder ultimately contain the seeds of their own destruction? The first mistake happened at exactly 11:42 p.m. on January 7, 1898, when Adelaide Wycliffe forgot to drug the coffee served to a traveling merchant named Thomas Kellerman. This wasn't just a simple oversight in their deadly routine. It was the beginning of a chain reaction that would expose decades of systematic murder to the outside world. The creak of loose floorboards echoed through the Grimsby homestead as Kellerman explored areas guests weren't meant to see. The metallic tang of blood hung faintly in the air, despite Magnolia Dunsworth's obsessive cleaning rituals. Under his fingertips, certain walls felt oddly hollow, concealing spaces that seemed far larger than the house's exterior dimensions suggested. These weren't the casual observations of a curious visitor. They were the careful assessments of a man whose survival instincts had been honed by years of dangerous travel through lawless territory. Thomas Kellerman wasn't the typical lone traveler who usually fell victim to Grimsby hospitality. A former Union Army quartermaster with connections throughout the Ohio River Valley, he maintained regular correspondence with business partners who would notice his absence within days. More importantly, he possessed the military training to recognize when a situation had turned deadly, and by midnight on January 7th, every fiber of his being screamed that something was catastrophically wrong in Ravens Hollow. The evening had begun normally enough. Kellerman arrived at the compound just before sunset, seeking shelter during a fierce winter storm that had made the mountain passes nearly impassable. Erasmus greeted him with the family's customary warmth, offering hot food and a warm bed in exchange for modest payment. The dinner conversation flowed pleasantly, with various family members asking polite questions about his travels and business dealings. But Kellerman's military experience had taught him to observe details others missed. The family's questions seemed designed to determine whether anyone expected his arrival at specific destinations. Their interest in his travel schedule felt more than casual. Most disturbing was their barely concealed excitement when he mentioned traveling alone with no scheduled stops for the next 2 weeks. From Thomas Kellerman's personal journal, recovered in 1923. Something is very wrong here. Too many adults for such poor land. The children watch me like I'm already dead. Found hair and fingernails in the soap. Adelaide's failure to administer the drugged coffee created an unprecedented situation. For the first time in nearly 20 years, a potential victim remained fully alert and mobile while the family prepared for elimination. Kellerman heard the basement door creak open around midnight, followed by the distinctive sound of metal tools being arranged on wooden surfaces. The whispered conferences between family members carried clearly through the thin walls, discussing timing and procedures with clinical detachment. Evil hides behind grace. Rather than panic, Kellerman drew upon his military training to gather intelligence about his captors. Moving silently through the house during the early morning hours, he discovered clear evidence of the family's true activities. Bloodstains on basement stairs that hadn't been completely scrubbed away, surgical instruments laid out with military precision. Most damning of all, a collection of personal effects from previous guests, arranged in careful categories: watches, rings, spectacles, and items of clothing that suggested dozens of different owners. The basement laboratory revealed the full scope of the Grimsby operation. Anatomical charts covered the walls, annotated with notes about optimal cuts and processing techniques. A large table bore restraints and drainage channels clearly designed for human use. Shelves lined with glass jars contained preserved organs and tissue samples, each meticulously labeled with dates and victim characteristics. Kellerman realized that escape would require extraordinary measures. The compound's isolation meant no possibility of outside assistance, and the family's size gave them overwhelming numerical advantage. His only hope lay in exploiting their overconfidence and their assumption that their drugging protocol had worked as intended. Cordelia Trenholm discovered the coffee error during her routine morning inspection of the guest quarters. Finding Kellerman's bed empty and his belongings undisturbed, she immediately alerted the rest of the family. What followed was the first manhunt in Grimsby family history, as 11 adults and 6 children spread throughout the compound, searching for their escaped victim. The hunt revealed critical weaknesses in their operation. Designed to handle drugged and helpless victims, the family had no protocols for pursuing mobile threats. Their coordination broke down as individual members pursued different theories about Kellerman's location. Most critically, their search efforts prevented them from maintaining normal daily routines, creating visible signs of crisis that would attract attention if observed by neighboring settlers. Kellerman used the family's confusion to his advantage, remaining hidden in the compound's extensive root cellar system while gathering additional evidence of their crimes. His military experience in reconnaissance proved invaluable as he documented the location of burial sites, identified key family members, and mapped escape routes through the surrounding wilderness. Lucius Harbottle organized increasingly desperate search efforts as the hours passed without locating their prey. The family's carefully maintained facade of hospitality crumbled under pressure, revealing the ruthless efficiency that had kept their operation secret for decades. Children were deployed as scouts, using their familiarity with the terrain to cover areas adults couldn't easily access. By afternoon, Sophronia Fenley made the decision that would ultimately destroy everything they had built. Rather than continue the search indefinitely, she ordered the family to eliminate Kellerman using whatever methods proved necessary, abandoning their traditional protocols of stealth and concealment. But how do you kill a man who knows you're coming? And what happens when systematic murderers suddenly find themselves fighting for their own survival? At 3:17 p.m. on January 8, 1898, Absalom Brackett made a fatal error that would expose the Grimsby family's crimes to the entire Appalachian region. He fired a rifle at Thomas Kellerman in broad daylight, within earshot of a mail carrier traveling the main mountain pass. This single gunshot transformed a contained family crisis into a public incident that demanded official investigation. The echo of that rifle blast carried across Ravens Hollow like a death knell for everything the Grimsbys had built. Because desperate murderers make careless mistakes, and careless mistakes leave witnesses who survive to tell the truth. The mail carrier, a weathered mountain man named Jeremiah Pike, had been delivering correspondence to scattered settlements for over 15 years. He knew the difference between hunting shots and something far more sinister. When a rifle report came from the Grimsby compound, followed immediately by human screaming and the sound of multiple people crashing through underbrush, Pike understood he was witnessing either attempted murder or successful defense against it. Thomas Kellerman had spent the previous night moving through the compound's extensive tunnel system, a network of root cellars and storage chambers that connected the main house to various outbuildings. His military engineering background allowed him to understand the layout's defensive possibilities while gathering additional evidence of the family's systematic murders. By dawn, he possessed detailed knowledge of their burial sites, weapon caches, and operational procedures. The tunnels revealed the true scope of Grimsby efficiency. Each underground chamber served specific functions in their murder and processing operation. One room contained restraining devices and drainage systems for bleeding victims. Another held grinding equipment for reducing bones to powder. A third chamber functioned as a meat processing facility, complete with hanging hooks and cutting tables that could accommodate multiple bodies simultaneously. From Kellerman's later testimony to federal marshals, found at least 40 sets of clothes sorted by size and season. Children's garments mixed with adult clothing. They kept everything, like trophies from a private war against humanity. Kellerman's escape strategy exploited the family's overconfidence and their lack of experience hunting alert prey. Using his knowledge of their tunnel system, he created multiple diversions while positioning himself near the compound's main entrance. His plan required drawing the family into open pursuit, where their actions could be observed by potential witnesses traveling the mountain passes. Death grows desperate. The Grimsby children proved more dangerous than their parents during the manhunt. Raised from infancy to view murder as routine family business, they displayed none of the hesitation that might slow adult killers when pursuing a victim. Young Ezra Grimsby, barely 14 years old, demonstrated remarkable skill with both rifle and knife while tracking Kellerman through the dense mountain forest. His sister Mercy showed equal proficiency with snares and traps, nearly capturing their prey twice during the early morning hours. Magnolia Dunsworth coordinated the search efforts with military precision, deploying family members in overlapping patrol patterns that should have prevented any escape from the hollow. Her tactical skills suggested previous experience with organized violence, though her background remained deliberately obscure. Under her direction, the family transformed from cannibalistic hosts into a hunting pack capable of sustained pursuit across difficult terrain. Sophronia Fenley's decision to abandon stealth protocols created immediate complications beyond their control. The family's normal routine of quiet elimination had never required sustained outdoor activity during daylight hours. Their sudden mobilization attracted attention from neighboring settlements, where smoke from cooking fires and the absence of routine daily sounds indicated unusual circumstances at the Grimsby compound. Elias Carawell attempted to maintain operational security while participating in the manhunt, but the dual requirements proved incompatible. His early warning system, designed to detect approaching strangers, failed to account for the family's own activities, creating visible signs of crisis. The compound's defensive measures worked against them when their own desperate search efforts triggered alarm signals meant to warn of outside threats. Kellerman's military training included expertise in psychological warfare, skills he deployed ruthlessly against his pursuers. By leaving deliberate traces of his passage in specific locations, he could manipulate the family's search patterns while gathering intelligence about their capabilities and coordination. His systematic approach to evasion revealed critical weaknesses in their operation that decades of success had allowed them to ignore. The fatal encounter between Kellerman and Absalom Brackett occurred near the compound's main gate, where the access road connected to the broader mountain trail system. Kellerman had positioned himself to intercept any family member who might attempt to prevent his escape, while simultaneously ensuring that any violence would be visible to travelers on the main pass. Brackett's rifle shot missed its target by less than 6 inches, striking an oak tree and sending bark fragments into Kellerman's face. The former quartermaster's return fire, delivered with military precision, ended Brackett's life instantly, while alerting Jeremiah Pike to the deadly conflict occurring within the supposedly peaceful Grimsby homestead. Pike's decision to investigate rather than flee would prove crucial in exposing the family's crimes. His testimony would provide the corroborating evidence needed to convince skeptical authorities that the Grimsby family represented something far more dangerous than simple mountain outlaws. But what happens when decades of systematic murder suddenly face the scrutiny of federal law enforcement? And how do cannibalistic killers respond when their carefully constructed world begins collapsing around them? By dawn on January 10, 1898, 3 federal marshals and a county sheriff surrounded the Grimsby compound, while Erasmus held his own granddaughter hostage with a butcher's cleaver pressed against her throat. The family's decades of careful planning hadn't included protocols for handling armed law enforcement, because systematic murderers rarely consider the possibility of their own capture. This standoff would determine whether 43 victims would receive justice or whether America's most successful cannibal family would add 4 more bodies to their collection. The metallic snap of rifle bolts echoed across the frozen hollow as Marshal William Crawford positioned his men behind strategic cover points. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the morning air, from warning shots fired to establish federal authority. Beneath the officers' boots, the ground felt unnaturally soft and rich. fertilized by decades of human remains that no one yet understood, lay buried throughout the compound's seemingly innocent gardens. Jeremiah Pike's eyewitness testimony had reached the federal courthouse in Charleston within 18 hours of Absalom Brackett's shooting. His detailed account of gunfire and pursuit at the Grimsby homestead, combined with Thomas Kellerman's shocking revelations about the family's cannibalistic activities, prompted an immediate federal response. The involvement of interstate mail routes and the systematic targeting of travelers crossing state lines elevated the case beyond local jurisdiction. Marshal Crawford brought extensive experience hunting dangerous fugitives throughout the Appalachian region, but nothing in his career had prepared him for the evidence Kellerman presented. The escaped victim's military bearing and precise testimony convinced skeptical federal authorities that the Grimsby family represented an unprecedented threat to public safety. His detailed maps of burial sites and descriptions of processing facilities suggested crimes on a scale that challenged comprehension. From Marshal Crawford's official report, dated January 12, 1898, subject property contains extensive evidence of systematic murder and cannibalism. Conservative estimate places victim count at minimum 40 individuals over a 20-year period. The federal response team included specialized personnel equipped to handle unusual criminal situations. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, a forensic physician from the University of Virginia, accompanied the Marshals to document physical evidence and examine remains. His medical expertise would prove crucial in establishing the scope of Grimsby crimes and identifying victims from fragmentary evidence. Sophronia Fenley orchestrated the family's initial response to the law enforcement presence with the same methodical planning that had characterized their murder operations. Rather than flee or surrender, she ordered the preparation of defensive positions throughout the compound while destroying evidence of their most incriminating activities. Her tactical thinking revealed military training that explained much about the family's operational efficiency. Justice comes for everyone. The family's children posed unexpected complications for the federal officers. Trained from infancy to view violence as normal family activity, they displayed no fear of armed law enforcement and actively participated in defensive preparations. 12-year-old Patience Grimsby demonstrated remarkable skill with firearms, while her younger brother assembled homemade explosive devices using materials from their chemical processing operations. Eugenia Blackford supervised the systematic destruction of evidence that could implicate family members in specific murders. Her efficient elimination of documentation, personal effects, and physical evidence suggested extensive preparation for this contingency. The family had clearly anticipated eventual discovery and developed protocols for minimizing legal consequences while maximizing their chances of escape. The compound's defensive capabilities exceeded law enforcement expectations. Lucius Harbottle had spent years preparing fortified positions and escape routes that could accommodate the entire extended family. Hidden tunnels connected major buildings, while concealed weapons caches provided sustained firepower for extended resistance. The homestead's design reflected military engineering principles that transformed domestic architecture into fortress-like defensive positions. Elias Carrowell attempted to negotiate with federal authorities while concealing the family's true intentions. His diplomatic approach masked preparations for a coordinated breakout that would scatter family members throughout the broader Appalachian region. Individual members carried specific assignments for regrouping at predetermined locations where cached supplies would support extended evasion efforts. Marshal Crawford's tactical assessment revealed the impossibility of capturing all family members simultaneously. The compound's size and defensive features provided too many opportunities for escape, while the family's coordination suggested they could sustain resistance indefinitely. His decision to demand unconditional surrender within 24 hours forced the Grimsbys to choose between capture and desperate final action. The hostage situation began when Cordelia Trenholm seized young Virtue Grimsby during a moment of chaos as federal officers attempted to establish closer positions around the main house. Erasmus immediately recognized the tactical advantage and assumed control of the situation, using his own grandchild as human shield, while making demands that revealed the family's true desperation. Federal authorities now faced an impossible dilemma: storm the compound and risk killing innocent children, or negotiate with cannibalistic murderers who had already demonstrated their willingness to destroy anyone who threatened their operation. But how do you bargain with killers who view their own family members as expendable assets, and what happens when systematic murderers realize they have nothing left to lose? The cleaver's edge drew a thin line of blood across 7-year-old Virtue Grimsby's neck. At exactly 2:31 p.m. on January 11, 1898, when her grandfather's trembling hands betrayed 40 years of steady butchering experience. This wasn't just the breakdown of a desperate hostage situation. It was the moment when systematic evil finally consumed itself, taking innocence along with guilt. The crack of splintering wood echoed across the compound as federal officers forced entry into secondary buildings, while the sweet stench of kerosene filled the air from the family's attempts to destroy evidence. Under Marshal Crawford's boots, loose floorboards revealed hidden chambers that would yield horrors beyond anything in his extensive law enforcement experience. The family's carefully constructed world was collapsing with the methodical thoroughness they had once applied to their victims. Erasmus Grimsby's psychological deterioration accelerated as federal pressure intensified. The patriarch, who had orchestrated decades of systematic murder, found himself unable to cope with circumstances beyond his control. His demands grew increasingly irrational, first requesting safe passage for all family members, then insisting on federal recognition of their territorial sovereignty, finally claiming divine authorization for their cannibalistic practices. Dr. Marcus Whitfield's preliminary examination of the compound's burial sites revealed evidence that surpassed even Thomas Kellerman's shocking testimony. Systematic excavation uncovered remains from at least 57 different individuals, including children as young as 8 years old. The methodical arrangement of graves suggested careful planning and record-keeping that transformed murder into bureaucratic routine. From Dr. Whitfield's forensic notes, skeletal remains show evidence of systematic butchering with surgical precision. Victim selection appears based on optimal meat yield rather than random opportunity. This represents industrial-scale cannibalism. Sophronia Fenley maintained operational command, while her husband descended into madness, coordinating defensive positions and evidence destruction with remarkable composure. Her leadership revealed the true power structure within the family organization. Erasmus provided the medical expertise and public face, but Sophronia made the strategic decisions that kept their operation successful for decades. The family's children presented federal officers with an unprecedented moral dilemma. Raised from infancy to view cannibalism as normal family activity, they genuinely believed their parents were being persecuted for practicing legitimate survival methods. Their tearful defense of family traditions included detailed descriptions of victim selection and processing techniques that horrified experienced law enforcement personnel. Evil consumes its own. Magnolia Dunsworth's systematic destruction of physical evidence revealed the operation's true sophistication. Her efficient elimination of documentation, cooking equipment, and stored remains suggested preparation for this contingency spanning multiple years. The family had developed detailed protocols for destroying incriminating evidence while maintaining plausible deniability about their activities. Marshal Crawford faced tactical challenges that exceeded standard law enforcement procedures. The compound's defensive features, designed by Elias Carawell using military engineering principles, provided multiple protected firing positions while channeling attacking forces into predetermined kill zones. Standard assault techniques would result in massive casualties among both federal officers and family members. Cordelia Trenham's attempt to reach one of the prepared escape tunnels triggered the final crisis. When federal officers moved to intercept her, young Virtue broke free from her grandfather's weakening grip and ran toward the sound of gunfire. Erasmus's panicked pursuit, cleaver still in hand, created the visual that would define public perception of the Grimsby family for generations to come. The photograph taken by accompanying journalist Henry Blackwood captured Erasmus Grimsby in full pursuit of his fleeing granddaughter, kitchen cleaver raised above his head, while federal marshals took aim from defensive positions. This single image would become the definitive visual representation of American cannibalism, reproduced in newspapers throughout the nation and establishing the template for future coverage of family-based serial murder. Lucius Harbottle's final act demonstrated the family's complete moral corruption. Rather than surrender when surrounded by federal officers, he attempted to eliminate potential witnesses by setting fire to the main house while family members remained trapped inside. His willingness to murder his own relatives to prevent testimony revealed how thoroughly their systematic evil had destroyed normal human bonds. The fire spread rapidly through the compound's interconnected buildings, destroying decades of carefully preserved evidence while threatening the lives of everyone present. Federal officers found themselves conducting simultaneous rescue and arrest operations as family members fled burning structures directly into the arms of waiting law enforcement personnel. Eugenia Blackford's capture provided the first cooperative witness among adult family members. Her detailed confession, given in exchange for reduced charges, revealed operational details that helped investigators understand the scope of Grimsby crimes. Her testimony described victim selection criteria, processing techniques, and distribution methods that had sustained the family's cannibalistic lifestyle for over 2 decades. Adelaide Wycliffe died in the flames, along with 3 of the younger children who had been unable to reach safety before the structural collapse. Her death eliminated one of the family's most knowledgeable participants, while creating additional tragedy that complicated public sympathy for the surviving family members. But how do you prosecute an entire family for systematic cannibalism? And what happens when the most horrific crimes in American history finally face the judgment of civilized society? The gavel fell for the final time at 4:47 p.m. on September 23, 1898, sealing the fate of America's most prolific cannibal family, while simultaneously burying the truth about their crimes beneath layers of official denial and public amnesia. This wasn't just the end of a legal proceeding, it was the systematic erasure of evidence that would have exposed how many authorities had ignored warning signs for decades. The courtroom in Charleston erupted with mixed reactions as Judge Harrison Caldwell delivered sentences that would satisfy public demand for justice, while protecting institutional reputations that couldn't survive closer scrutiny. The smell of fresh ink filled the courthouse as journalists scrambled to file reports that bore little resemblance to the actual evidence presented during 3 months of testimony. The rustle of newspaper pages carried whispered conversations among spectators who understood that official justice and actual truth rarely occupied the same courtroom. Beneath the polished oak surfaces of the judge's bench lay court records that would mysteriously disappear from public archives within 5 years, ensuring that future researchers would find only sanitized summaries of the Grimsby trials. 7 surviving family members faced charges ranging from first-degree murder to conspiracy and desecration of corpses. Sophronia Fenley, despite overwhelming evidence of her leadership role, received only 25 years imprisonment after her attorney successfully argued that she had been controlled by her domineering husband. Her composed testimony revealed nothing about operational details, while expressing appropriate remorse for failing to prevent her family's criminal activities. Eugenia Blackford's cooperation with federal prosecutors earned her a reduced sentence of 15 years, though her detailed confessions were sealed from public view to protect ongoing investigations. Her testimony described victim processing techniques and burial locations that helped authorities identify dozens of additional remains, but these discoveries never appeared in official case summaries distributed to news organizations. From sealed federal documents declassified in 1973. Blackford testimony indicates systematic communication network extending throughout Appalachian region. Recommend investigation of similar family operations in Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia. Request denied due to resource constraints. The surviving Grimsby children presented unique legal challenges that revealed the inadequacy of existing criminal justice systems. Ranging in age from 8 to 17 years old, they had been raised to view cannibalism as normal family activity and displayed no understanding of moral boundaries that governed civilized society. Their matter-of-fact descriptions of victim processing horrified court officials while raising questions about criminal responsibility that had no legal precedents. Truth buried in paper. Judge Caldwell's decision to commit the younger children to state institutions rather than prosecute them as adults sparked controversy among legal scholars who argued that systematic indoctrination into murder warranted adult criminal penalties regardless of age. The older teenagers, particularly those who had actively participated in hunting Thomas Kellerman, received sentences to juvenile detention facilities with provisions for release upon reaching adulthood. Dr. Marcus Whitfield's forensic examination ultimately identified remains from 63 different victims, representing the largest mass murder case in American history to that date. His detailed reports documented systematic dismemberment and evidence of cannibalistic consumption spanning over 20 years. These findings, however, were classified as confidential medical records and removed from public access to prevent sensational press coverage. The federal government's handling of physical evidence revealed institutional priorities that favored public peace over historical accuracy. The Grimsby compound was demolished within 6 months of the trial's conclusion, with all structures burned and the land declared unsuitable for future habitation. Remaining human remains were interred in unmarked graves at an undisclosed location, preventing future investigation or memorial recognition of victims. Erasmus Grimsby's execution on December 15, 1898, drew crowds of over 3,000 spectators to the Charleston Courthouse Square. His final statement, delivered with characteristic medical precision, contained detailed confessions about victim selection and processing methods that newspapers refused to publish. The condemned patriarch's clinical descriptions of systematic murder revealed no remorse while providing insights into the psychology of organized cannibalism that terrified attending officials. Thomas Kellerman's survival testimony became the primary source of public information about Grimsby crimes, though federal authorities edited his accounts to remove the most disturbing details. His descriptions of the family's operational efficiency and systematic approach to murder were modified to emphasize individual pathology rather than organizational sophistication that suggested broader criminal networks. The case's impact on regional law enforcement practices remained minimal despite overwhelming evidence of institutional failures. Multiple agencies had received reports about missing travelers and suspicious activities at the Grimsby compound over 2 decades without conducting serious investigations. Post-trial reviews resulted in no personnel changes or procedural reforms, suggesting that systematic negligence faced no consequences. Local communities throughout Appalachian regions responded to the Grimsby revelations with increased suspicion of isolated families and traveling strangers. The case established templates for identifying potential cannibal operations, while simultaneously demonstrating law enforcement's willingness to overlook inconvenient evidence when investigations threatened established social order. But the most chilling aspect of the Grimsby case wasn't what happened in Ravens Hollow. It was how quickly America chose to forget and how many similar operations might still be operating in isolated communities where screams echo unheard and appetites remain satisfied. Even today, hikers in the former Ravens Hollow area report finding bone fragments and rusted metal implements that seem far too old to be connected to modern hunting activities. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even darker. Subscribe before it drops.